Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 here on Broadcasting Scotland. I'm Kenny McBride and I'm joined tonight by, from the SNP Socialist Group, Chris McCusker. Chris, how are you this evening?
Second night in a row, thanks very much. Again, Kenny, you must be scraping the barrel.
we just can't get enough of you, Chris. That's what it is.
Oh, thanks very much.
And for those of you at home, if you want to join us on social media, you can follow us at Broadcast Scot and you can use the hashtag Scotland at 7 if you want to join the conversation. But our first story tonight, our majority of voters in Scotland now support independence, with 50% set to support the SNP at a Holyrood election, according to a new poll. The panel-based poll, commissioned by The National, found support for independence at 52%, the third poll in a row showing a majority for yes, while the SNP also significantly ahead on Holyrood voting intentions, with Tories trailing 24 points behind on 26%, and Labour on just 14% of the vote share. This is the best panel-based poll for the SNP in over 3.5 years. Last week, a poll from YouGov also found a 51% majority in support of Scottish independence, while a Survation poll earlier found yes taking the lead with the polling company for the first time in 3.5 years. Commenting, SNP Deputy Leader Keith Brown said, "This is yet another poll which shows support for independence continues to grow across Scotland, and momentum for a fresh referendum is now unstoppable. Scotland has been dragged out of the EU against our will by a Tory government with no mandate here, a government which says it doesn't matter one jot what the Parliament the people of Scotland actually elect decides. The Tories are running scared of democracy, but their opposition to a referendum is completely unsustainable. The more Boris Johnson seeks to deny people in Scotland the right to determine our future, the more support for independence will continue to grow." So, Chris, this is pretty impressive results. 3 polls in a row showing 50% or above supporting independence. What does this tell us about the state of play in Scotland now?
Well, I don't think it tells us anything other than the fact that, as Keith said, it is pretty much unstoppable. And everything that the Westminster government come out to try and counter it, it just garners support every week on week. And as long as they keep on denying us the right to do things, then people are going to get resentful, obviously, and resentful in a political sense, which they would be able to use their democratic, the democratic process to actually go to the ballot box and cast their vote for Scotland to be independent.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you mentioned there that this, and as Keith Brown said, that the more the Tories say no, the more the people of Scotland are likely to say yes. We did notice on that chart, though, there was quite a wee dip just right around election time at the end of last year. Do you think maybe the benefit just now is that the SNP are talking a lot about independence while the Tories have eased off a wee bit? And that maybe this isn't quite as strong as we hope, and maybe there is some fragility in that.
We kind of touched on this last night when we were chatting with Gordon, and you made the comment of a certain apathetic view towards Scottish independence back in 2017, and that may be down to the fact that the campaign wasn't, what we would call, a sterling campaign,
ironic.
Ironic. But the momentum, such as now, did I use the Labour word momentum? the momentum now has clearly shown that it's galloping pace towards independence. There is no other alternative. Well, there are. The other alternative is the fact that Scotland continues to get used and abused by the Westminster government for its own ends, or do the people of Scotland say, no, enough is enough, and we want a different direction for Scotland? The bigger question thereafter is, how do we reach out to these people who possibly didn't vote for independence because they weren't fully set on the EU? There was quite a, there was a varying demographic of people that wanted the EEA model, the Norway model of EFTA, So how do we bring them together? And that's a conversation that we need to have. We need to have it pretty quickly.
Yeah. One of the other things that this poll produced was a seat projection. The SNP got 50% of the constituency vote in this poll. The seat projections that the poll produced: the SNP 67, which would be up 4, the Tories on 32, which would be up 1, Labour on 17, which would be down 7, the Greens on 7, and the Lib Dems on 6. And that would put the Greens above the Lib Dems for the first time, which would be, I think, be a landmark. The SNP on 67 would be an overall majority in their own right. Mm-hmm. If that projection is right for 2021, and as some people have speculated, we don't get an independence referendum this year. Do you think that is the kind of mandate that, as several people have said, that Boris Johnson would just not be able to say no anymore without looking like a tin pot dictator?
That looks like a comfortable mandate for anybody with an independence sort of like mind. People could quite happily accept that. Mm-hmm. But I would press for a bigger majority if possible. But the telling one there is the Lib Dems. You said it would be a landmark. I don't think it'd be a landmark. I think it would sound the death knell for the Lib Dems in Scotland. It's a sad state of affairs when you can actually, do worse than Scottish Labour.
I mean, Scottish Labour there shows them losing 7 seats. I mean, is there? We've said every election, is this the lowest Labour can go? Mm-hmm. And according to this project, if this projection were to hold, which obviously things are going to change between now and 2021.
Yeah.
But if that were to hold, I mean, it says something pretty desperate about the state of Scottish Labour, that they just can't seem to get out of freefall.
Well, I'm not going to. I'm going to single one Labour MSP out that sits on the list vote. A chap called Neil Bibby, mm-hmm. And he's supposed to be MSP list vote for West of Scotland. Mm-hmm. So I've my choice in Eastwood, unfortunately, is Jackson Carlaw as my MSP.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. If I've got any issues, then I should either go to Neil Bibby or I could approach Ross Greer. So unfortunately, because Tom Arthur is in Renfrewshire South, mm-hmm. Obviously Tom can't help me out and stuff like that. So what I'm saying is that in the last 2 years, I've yet to see Neil Bibby actually do anything in the actual Parliament. Mm-hmm. Thanks to Broadcasting Scotland, I sit and watch the comings and goings at Holyrood and at Westminster. That's how much a closet I am. But I honestly, genuinely, I want to know what Neil Bibby does. I want to know what he brings to the table. Mm-hmm. Because he's never in the newspapers. He's never in very rarely he's in the media press on the internet as actually doing anything for East Renfrewshire, mm-hmm. or for the West of Scotland.
Yeah.
So you have to wonder what these list people actually bring to the table.
Yeah, I mean, in a group that small, you would think it would be relatively easy to kind of elbow your way to the front and achieve something, at least get known for something. But as you say, the Labour Party, we keep talking about it. We keep talking about their decline and why it's happening. If they want to know, we will, and they pay us enough, we will consult with them, tell them how they can fix things, because we've talked about it at great length on this show.
Please come in, Neil, and tell us what you do.
If Neil Bibby wants to come in and have a conversation with Chris about what he does, we will welcome him. We do have to move on, though, and this story is about the COP26 conference that's due to happen in Glasgow at the end of this year. Boris Johnson has shown a huge lack of leadership and engagement over the UK's hosting of the COP26 Global Climate Change Conference, and admitted he does not understand the issue, according to Claire O'Neill, the sacked head of the summit. The former minister, who was leading efforts to hold the COP gathering of world leaders in Glasgow in November, said the UK was playing at Oxford United levels when we really need to be Liverpool. in terms of the effort to tackle the climate emergency. O'Neill was dismissed on Friday by Johnson's key advisor, Dominic Cummings, and has since sent a letter to the Prime Minister saying the UK is miles off track and that promises of action are not close to being met. She told BBC Radio 4's Today programme that we are miles off track globally where we are meant to be, and there had been a huge lack of leadership and engagement from the current administration. She said her job had been a lonely place and that Johnson had admitted to me he doesn't really understand it. O'Neill said the Cabinet Subcommittee on the Climate Conference had not met since it formed in October. She also described problems with the choice of Glasgow as the host city, with spiralling costs and disputes between the UK and Scottish governments. The playground politics, the Yaboo politics, has got to stop, she said. In her letter to Johnson, O'Neill suggested his personal animosity towards Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, was endangering the success of the summit, and claimed the Prime Minister was considering relocating the event to an English location because of ballooning costs. So, I mean, I get the feeling you're not going to be entirely surprised by Boris Johnson being ignorant and incompetent and Dominic Cummings sticking his oar in to ill effect.
Absolutely not surprised.
It hits on all your trigger issues, doesn't it?
It really is. I like your analogy between Oxford United and Liverpool. You know, being a Scots Liverpool fan, or should I say a Scottish Liverpool fan, but this more worrying for me is this hint or this careful suggestion that COP26 could get taken away from Glasgow because of the spiralling costs. Because Nicola has made it perfectly clear that the UK government have to fund the full costs of holding COP26, and that includes the security as well. And not one penny should be paid by Scotland. You know, because Boris is, and Nicola's very clever at doing this, because, you know, she's basically holding Boris to his word by saying, well, if this is a whole and equal union and we're, you know, to play our part, right, it's not for Scotland to hold the COP26. You know, if we were an independent country, sure, we would need to pay all the costs. Yeah. You know, so, but, you know, they've chosen it, so they should pay the bill. And I wouldn't rule out this hint of that it could be relocated to somewhere like Birmingham or something like that.
Well, I mean, the quote that really jumped out to me was the idea that it's because Boris Johnson hates Nicola Sturgeon personally so much.
Oh yeah.
That I mean, I think that it's not just a personal thing. I'm sure there's political elements to it. They don't want Scotland to look good on the world stage.
Well, no, but then you know, Boris doesn't like Nicola because he recognises that she's head and shoulders above him, stateswoman-wise. She was clever enough not to allow him to lead her up the door of Bute House when he came to visit. He's not happy about the fact that he was shown the back door in order to get out of Bute House. So, you know, and he's constantly fed up with the fact that you know we're on his case 24/7, arguing the fact that Scotland should be an independent country.
Yeah, I mean, obviously this is a huge conference. There's been a lot of things have happened. The SNP, the Scottish Government, as I understand it, had booked several venues, including the likes of the Hydro, to try and make sure that we had all these venues booked out because the UK government was taking so long to get things organised. So yeah, there's been a lot of just really incompetence from London, and a lot of the Scottish government saying, no, we need to get on with this. We need to do things.
Yeah. I mean, also on Twitter today, Nicola pointed out the fact that she's been invited to 3 previous COP events, and there is a heavy suggestion there that Boris doesn't want her anywhere near it. I remember there was a couple of weeks ago where he said that he wants to see British flags and maybe the occasional saltire, but that's it. Yeah. And he famously said that he didn't want Nicola Sturgeon to be there.
Yeah.
You know, so he's not really helping in the rhetoric that he's coming out with.
Yeah, I mean, Sturgeon has written to Boris Johnson today, basically saying you need to step the game up. We need to be involved. We need to talk about this. We need to cooperate. It's a big deal, and it has to happen. I mean, I suspect we'll get the same response that Boris Johnson gives to most letters from Nicola Sturgeon, which is, I don't care about Scotland.
Yeah. Well, there was I can't remember her name, but there was the MSP who had been dealing with this woman that's been sacked. She met her, I think it was in Madrid at Christmas time, and she was saying that discussions back and forth were going quite congenially, but she was reinforcing the fact that Scotland has to be included in the planning of COP22. What then is happening is what we've seen in the Brexit negotiations, where we weren't invited down to Downing Street at all.
Of course not. And just one wee other environmental story that came out today. The British government said that by 2035, diesel fueled cars should be off the table.
Well,
and diesel and petrol. While the Scottish government has already said by 2032 we should be on that.
And the 2 points that I want to make out of that is that Boris Johnson always says that Britain's the first to do this, where
but
it's
usually Scotland's that's first in Britain.
The original target was 2040. So in order to counter this allegation of where he said, I don't really understand this, he's just shaved 5 years off of a target. Well, we know that Boris isn't in favour of targets because he scrapped the waiting time targets for the accident and emergency in England.
Yep, I'm actually just getting in my ear that the Scottish target is 2025. So a full I misheard that. It is 2032. Anyway, we will move. We are a wee bit short of time. We are going to move on. So, I'm just getting in my ear there. 2045 is net zero. The net zero target for the Scottish economy as a total versus 2050 for the UK. Sorry about that, folks. We are going to move on now, though. Labour, SNP, Lib Dem and even some Tory MPs have criticised the exclusion of journalists from a Number 10 briefing. MPs have said that Boris Johnson is undermining press freedom after certain reporters were banned by his top media advisor from attending a government briefing on the EU. A series of Labour, SNP, Lib Dem and even some Tory MPs raised concerns about the events on Monday afternoon in 10 Downing Street when selected journalists were invited to a briefing and others were excluded. It prompted a walkout by all the senior journalists invited to the briefing, including the BBC's Laura Kuenssberg, ITV's Robert Peston, and reporters from Sky, The Telegraph, The Sun, The Mail, The Guardian, and The Financial Times. The incident was debated in the House of Commons after Tracy Brabin, the Shadow Culture Secretary, was granted an urgent question. Chloe Smith, a Cabinet Office Minister, defended the briefing as a normal way of informing some journalists about specialist technical subjects, in addition to routine lobby briefings to be held twice daily. Pete Wishart, the SNP MP, said the minister's attempts to defend the selective briefing were woeful and desperate and would make Comical Ali look like a Pulitzer Prize winner, calling it a black day for press freedom. The government's actions have been condemned by the Society of Editors and the National Union of Journalists. So, Pete, Chris, I know this is the kind of thing that tends to irritate you quite a lot as well. Again, this seems to be the Dominic Cummings waving his wand and making the media narrative into what he wants it to be. But the journalists, to their credit, stood in solidarity and walked out of the briefing.
Yeah, I need to stop short of actually apportioning any credit to the Sun. That would just throw my credibility right out at Anfield. Yes, I actually watched this urgent question today, and I was actually quite shocked because I didn't really know much about the story until I actually watched the debate. And the minister that was put up to try and defend the indefensible as Pete says, was absolutely comical. It really was. They were basically saying, now that we are moving on in this one nation conservatism, then the whole of the British media are going to be treated exactly the same. So therefore, it's okay if we choose 6 or 8 members of the press who happen to reside in England or Wales and none in Scotland, then that's just tough titties. Do you know what I mean? And such is their lack of regard, again, was highlighted not by just the SNP, but also by Labour as well.
Yeah, I mean, even Sir Peter Bottomley, the Tory father of the House, said that there was a problem which needed to be resolved. He did say that the behaviour of New Labour spin doctors had been worse, but that shouldn't be the standard that we're aiming for.
No, well, I mean, I think if you're aiming the standards to Alistair Campbell, then you're not aiming very high, do you know? But it is quite welcome actually to have this debated as an urgent question. Because it has to be highlighted the fact that the media in Britain is absolutely woeful. I mean, you and I have discussed, who runs the media and stuff like that, and who's at the top and who's pulling the strings. This wouldn't have been a private conversation. You could actually think about this between Murdoch and Cummings. And Boris not even in the conversation, and Cummings basically, taking his pick of who he wants to pitch his rhetoric
who
to,
he thinks he can trust,
and who will push it.
Yeah,
do you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of these problems that we're always talking about here. I mean, it's what Broadcasting Scotland exists to do, is to be another kind of non-establishment voice. I mean, there was complaints from Keir Starmer. He emphasised the concern over politicising the civil service in this way, that there were civil service briefings that were being offered to this select group of journalists, and he felt that this was a problem. Also, asking civil servants to organise the briefing was again asking them to take a political role. You will, of course, remember that nobody from Labour complained when the civil service celebrated their impartiality in the 2014 referendum. So, I mean, talking about hypocrisy and media failure
on a grand scale
in this country is not a foreign idea to most of our viewers, nor to anyone who sits at this table. We will move on, though. As I say, we could talk about media corruption all day and Tory corruption all day, and we'd still not get through it all.
Oh no, we would need to bring sleeping bags up.
Exactly. We will move on, though. A proposal to shift the power to set business rates from the Scottish Government to councils was defeated in Holyrood today. SNP, Labour and Conservative MSPs voted against a move by Scottish Green MSP Andy Whiteman, which would have seen local authorities handed back the rates which was removed from them during the Margaret Thatcher premiership. Mr. Whiteman said his proposal, which he'd hoped to embed in the new non-domestic rates bill, would have righted a fundamental wrong. He also dismissed concerns raised by business organisations and COSLA about the speed at which the power would be given to councils, saying that it would not happen until 2024. The proposal had caused a row between the Scottish Greens and the SNP, with the former accusing the government of scaremongering amid claims the plans would see small businesses face a rates hike of more than £7,000, as rates relief could end. Despite the idea being backed in principle by Labour and the Conservatives, both parties voted against the amendment, with only the Scottish Liberal Democrats voting in support. The amendment to the legislation would have stopped the uniform business rate used to calculate non-domestic property tax being set nationally, and instead would allow local authorities to set their own rates. Mr. Whiteman said non-domestic rates are a local tax, and for well over a century they were under full control of the level of government to whom they belonged, before being centralised by Margaret Thatcher's government. This vote today is the first time in the history of devolution to make provision for this historic wrong to be corrected. It's a vote for democracy, and to make Scotland a normal European country by giving local authorities the right to control their own tax base. Or we continue with the centralisation which started with in the Thatcher era and which assumes that the Finance Secretary knows what's best for local authorities. Non-domestic rates is a local tax. It belongs to local government and councils. Just as the Scottish Parliament sets Scottish tax rates, so too should local authorities set local tax rates. And Chris, we talked a bit about this last night. The bill was defeated today, so Andy Whiteman doesn't get his wish to have this go back to the councils.
Well, is it not going to get debated again tomorrow as well?
No. Today was the end of it.
I think
as
you
far
might
as we know.
find that it's back on the cards
Well, this was the stage 3 debate. If there's some other proposal that comes up tomorrow, I'm sure we'll talk about that then.
Yeah.
But what do you think about this? Do you think Andy Whiteman's right? First of all, that this is a.
I do think that Andy Whiteman is right. However, I think it's ill-timed. We will see how Scotland replicates a European country once we are independent. But as long as we're not in control of the fiscal powers that allow us to make radical changes, then I don't think that we should be making these changes at this moment in time. I mean, after last night's discussion, I did go and do a wee bit of research on this, just so that I could fully understand it, because I was kind of like in your corner, where, I was kind of like, I could see the arguments for and against. And I totally get what Andy Whiteman's, what he's trying to do. I just think that it's too soon. And we can't run before we can walk. As I said last night, as a socialist, I'm all about the redistribution of wealth. Anybody can see what he is proposing is designed to spread the money more equally. However, I don't think that we can do that until we're well into being a European, independent country in charge of all of the fiscal levers that are available to us.
Yeah. Now, part of this did change the way that private schools are going to be taxed. They're not going to be treated as kind of as charities anymore.
Yeah. Well,
so they will now have to pay, which is I think one quite important progressive step that's been made.
Yeah, I've seen one similarity or one example being pointed out. The Fettes College is substantially lower than the high school that's just round the corner. I think the high school's on something like $7,000 a year on rates, and Fettes College is something like, like 1.5.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So
that certainly sounds
the actual disparity
wildly wrong.
Yeah. But the actual disparity is quite plain for everybody to see. Yeah. So I mean, I'm not a fan of public school. I'm sure you're not either, no. Ken. So I think that they should be paying their fair share of.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is probably a story that will come back. I'm sure Andy Whiteman is not going to give up. He's not known as a man who gives up a campaign easily. And I think that the fact that there is clearly a lot of support for the change, it just seems that this, as you say, this wasn't the time for a lot of people. So we will keep an eye on it. There's been plenty in that bill that, as I say, like the public schools, or private schools we should call them. The things like that have been changed that are going to be an improvement. I think we have to just hope that they keep building.
Yep, definitely.
Anyway, back to Westminster, where SNP MP Neil Gray has slammed the UK Tory government for further delays to the rollout of universal credit and the shambles surrounding the announcement, which was highlighted in a BBC documentary with discussions dating back to last September. The SNP's Shadow Work and Pensions Secretary led an urgent question in the House of Commons today, challenging the UK government on its failure to inform MPs of the delays in the rollout of universal credit. Universal credit, which was due to be fully rolled out by 2017, has now been delayed on numerous occasions to a new date in late 2024, adding a staggering £500 million to the total cost of the policy. Gray urged UK ministers to halt the rollout and invest meaningfully in universal credit to fix its numerous problems, including scrapping the 2-child cap and the rape clause, ending the debt and poverty-inducing 5-week wait, and making work pay by fully restoring the work allowances. He also challenged the DWP on whether this delay will mean that more people will be part of natural migration rather than the managed migration process, risking people losing out on transitional payments and saving the UK government money at the expense of those who really need it. And this, well, as I say, since 2017, when this was originally supposed to happen, the universal credit was supposed to be fully rolled out, we are still talking about another 4-year delay.
Yeah.
Almost 5 years, in fact. It's late 2024.
Yeah.
Almost 5 years longer to wait. What is wrong with the British government?
They don't want to back down. Theresa May never wanted to back down from this. She put her neck on the line and said, "This is the way forward. This fixes the unequal benefit legacy from the Labour administration. This is the Tories' vision, and we're not going to drop it." They've then went on to concede that several areas need to be fixed on it, as we've went through, and several assiduous MPs have highlighted the 5-week wait, and Chris Stevens stood up today and also pointed out the fact that the payments are in arrears. So you're constantly playing catch up. And these loans, are just totally unfair. And they are just not conceding on any ground on it whatsoever. Labour are obviously, and the SNP would like to see it scrapped altogether and just start from the bottom. But they just won't do it because it doesn't suit them to do it. They've got no other imagination, and this is the way that they're going to go. So the only thing that the opposition can do, from what I can ascertain, is that they can only just keep chipping away and trying to force the Tories into making the small changes and give a concession here and a concession there. That's the only way to go. They will not drop it.
Yeah, it's a system that we've talked at length about on other shows, and it is one that is just, this story again is just going to run and run, because until the end of 24 at least, we're still going to be waiting.
They were also shamed, the minister who was trying to defend this insidious policy. It was absolutely owned by the new MP. His surname escapes me. I think it's Stuart. One of the new MPs for the SNP, he's a single father, so he was actually on UC before he was elected as an MP, and he was telling them that he had first-hand experience of surviving on universal credit, and it doesn't work. And the guy was absolutely, the minister at the dispatch box, he wasn't ready for an MP to say, "No, hold on, mate, I've actually had universal credit, and I know the effects of it firsthand." And it just totally bowled him over, and he just kept on gibbering on crap about, you need to go and visit your local job centre and talk to your job coach and whatnot and what have you. I've never been to a job centre in my life where a job coach has turned around to me and said, "So how are you getting on with your bid to become an MP?" It's totally unreal. I mean, fair play to the guy for becoming an MP and all the rest of it. But fair play to him as well for having first-hand knowledge of how universal credit actually works.
It's one of these problems that I think we're always going to have with the kind of people who become Tory MPs are the kind of people who have never experienced poverty, and I just simply can't imagine what it's like. I mean, we've seen once or twice on the TV, you've seen MPs going to try and live on job seekers allowance or whatever it was called in previous eras, and every time they go, "How does anybody do this? This is insane." But it never changes. Nobody ever actually, none of the people in power ever actually look at these things and say, how is this going to affect people who live in poverty?
That type of sensationalist reality TV for 3 days.
Yeah,
At the weekend
doesn't begin to describe the grind.
Doesn't even begin to do justice to what people go through on a day-to-day basis.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, back in Holyrood as well, in Westminster as well, SNP MPs will attempt to vote today on the NHS funding bill, which has been ruled an England-only piece of legislation under Tory English Votes for English Laws rules. Ahead of the vote, the SNP had renewed calls for the UK government to match Scottish per capita NHS spending to allow Holyrood to increase funding for NHS Scotland by over £4 billion by the end of this UK Parliament. Now, the bloc of 47 SNP MPs will attempt to press the issue in the final stages of the bill's passage by ignoring the evil rules. Health funding in Scotland has increased to record levels despite cuts to Scotland's frontline budget from Westminster that total £1.5 billion in real terms between 2010 and 2020. The SNP Scottish Government have already abolished prescription charges, extended free personal care to all under 65 who need it, delivered higher NHS staffing per head than NHS England, secured the highest number of GPs per head of population in the UK, and ensured Scotland's core A&E services are the best performing in the UK. The action comes ahead of the SNP bringing forward their NHS Protection Bill tomorrow to protect the NHS from trade deals with foreign nations. And this is something that has been pressed by Amy Callaghan, a new MP, someone who's been on the show just before she was elected, and then, of course, triumphed over the fragrant Jo Swinson.
Yeah.
So Amy Callaghan has been talking about this, and is this right? Do you think, Chris, for the SNP to have moved on this?
Definitely, and again, because Amy's got first-hand experience of the NHS, having been a cancer survivor from the age of 18, so she knows, what it actually means to be in the front line, and what the direct funding actually does for Scotland. So I think it's absolutely 100% correct for the SNP to, because of this is, surrounded with this evil thing that the English Votes for English Laws routine, and the SNP, or should I say the Scottish MPs, can only vote on it in matters pertaining to Scotland. So if they do feel...
I am just getting word that the vote has actually happened now, and the SNP MPs were stopped from voting. They were blocked from going through the lobbies.
That's absolutely shocking, because the Deputy Speaker actually pointed out, it took her 2 or 3 minutes to actually go through the procedure, and Pete Wishart stood up after 3 minutes and said, "Could you repeat exactly what you've just said so that we can all understand it?" It's a wee bit a point of order. But quintessentially, she was saying that the Scottish MPs could vote on matters pertaining to Scotland that arise out of this bill.
And clearly, anything with Barnett consequential spending is going to affect Scotland.
But again, you telling me that the thing that we've been prevented, that's just, another smack in the face, which I was also going to highlight that, today's been a kind of like a bloody nose day for the SNP, with regards Boris Johnson about the COP26 and all the rest of it. And then earlier on we had the Tory MP Will Quince turn around to Martin Docherty Hughes and made a derisory joke about sharing a deep-fried Mars bar.
Yeah. The contempt at Westminster never seems to stop.
Absolutely shocking. And this is coming from a guy that actually claimed expenses for his Amazon subscription. Do you know what I mean? Why do we put up with this? It gets to the point where people like me, of sound mind and body, get so exasperated at the television that you're screaming for everybody just to pick their bags up and come up the road.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Because the level of abuse that the MPs take is absolutely horrendous.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I suspect, once again, this is a story that we will keep coming back to, but We have to move on now. And Dominic Raab, the Foreign Secretary, has encouraged British citizens to leave China if they could, saying the suspension of airline flights and restrictions on movement will make it harder to leave over the coming weeks. The safety and security of British people will always be our top priority, Raab said in a statement. As such, we now advise British nationals in China to leave the country if they can to minimise their risk of exposure to the virus. Where there are still British nationals in Hubei province who wish to be evacuated, we will continue to work around the clock to facilitate this. British Airways and Virgin Atlantic have already cancelled flights to and from China. In an update to its travel advice, the Foreign Office also said some staff and dependents from the British Embassy and consulates were being withdrawn from China. Essential staff, such as those providing consular assistance, would remain. The ability of the British Embassy and consulates to provide assistance to British nationals from within China is limited, and would be even more limited in the event that the situation deteriorates further, the statement added. Hong Kong reported its first coronavirus death on Tuesday, the second outside mainland China from a fast-spreading outbreak that has killed 427 people and threatened the global economy. I suppose it's something if the British government is helping people get out of the way of harm in China. It's one good thing they can claim they did today.
I don't even see that this has been a positive, because they're not making any provision for the people who are the British citizens who actually work and study there. So, there was one girl that was being interviewed on the radio, and she was saying that she's had to return to Scotland, and the university that she studies in, she's studying economics, they were willing to carry the study on over the internet. However, there's a time difference, so she can't get tutorial support. No. Because of the time difference, so it's setting her back. Yeah. Whilst this service is available to the Chinese students who can access it in Chinese time, that's fine. But the other students, they're being left at a disadvantage.
Oh dear.
So, from that point of view, they're not really telling you the full story. As well as the British citizens who actually work in that province as well. They're being hampered, they're not getting paid. And because they're British citizens, the consulate need to represent them. So the only good thing that Raab can possibly come out and say is that some brave wee souls who are consulate support have volunteered to stay behind in order to carry on that consular support. The flights and all the rest of it, I think is gesture politics. Yeah. At this moment in time.
Well, again, the coronavirus story is a growing one. We will keep an eye on it. Obviously, there are now infections in Britain. There are infections in Europe. There has been a person-to-person transmission now outside China in several countries. So it is something that's going to continue to be a big story over the coming weeks. And the economic issue is becoming a bigger one. I'm sure we'll talk about that in the coming days. China is now becoming extremely concerned about the economic impact of this. But now to the United States, where the Democratic Party's efforts to choose an election challenger to Donald Trump got off to a chaotic start in Iowa, with officials blaming inconsistencies for an indefinite delay in the state's caucus results, and the president gloating over his rival's misfortune. Long lines and big crowds were reported in some of the more than 1,600 schools, community centres and other locations last night, and problems with a new mobile app designed to report the vote forced state party officials to verify the data by other means. Some Democratic candidates left for New Hampshire, which hosts the next nominating contest on February the 11th, without a winner being announced in Iowa. The chaos was likely to increase criticism from Democrats who have long complained that the rural state, with a largely white population, has an outsized role in determining the presidential candidate. Shortly after midnight last night, Iowa Democratic Party Chairman Troy Price told reporters to expect results later today in the state, the first to hold a nominating contest. The party said it had to make quality checks after finding inconsistencies in the reporting of the data from caucus sites, sparking frustration among Democrats and criticism from Republicans. Trump mocked the Democrats, calling the caucus confusion an unmitigated disaster in a Twitter post early this morning. Nothing works just like when they ran the country. The delay prompted two leading candidates in the Iowa race, Bernie Sanders and Mayor Pete Buttigieg, to release their own tallies. It was unclear when official results would be released, although reports have said that sometime this evening around 50% of the results will be released. We have yet to get confirmation on that. Some local officials reported having trouble using the mobile app to report results, but when they turned to the traditional method, the telephone, they were put on hold and couldn't get through. We haven't had that problem before that I know of. Normally we've called it in and got right through, said Donna Crum, chair of the Democratic Party in Mills County, Iowa. Iowa Democratic Party officials said they were confident in their ability to ensure accurate results, citing a paper trail to validate the vote. So, Chris, we did report on the result in Glasgow last night. We went and spoke to some of the caucusers just after the caucus happened here. So in Glasgow, it was very simple, all went very well. The app presumably was not especially busy at that earlier time.
Yeah.
And in Glasgow, I'm sure you'll be glad to hear, Bernie Sanders came out first with 9, Elizabeth Warren came second with 6, and Pete Buttigieg came third with 3. Which meant that Bernie Sanders got 2 delegates and each of the others got 1, which is just one of the weird mathematical things that you have to deal with when you're looking at the Iowa caucuses. But this chaos is just unbelievable.
Is this going to throw up more stories of conspiracy, corruption?
Well, there's one tweet that we saw just before we came on air. I don't know if we can maybe tweet it out, retweet it out, of somebody doing a coin flip, because there are times when the vote's tied that you have to flip a coin. And this one fella who I don't think had ever seen somebody flip a coin before. He appeared to be looking at the coin in his hand before he turned it and put it out on the back of his hand. Very strange. There are all sorts of different things coming out. Pete Buttigieg claimed that he had won. Bernie Sanders claims that he has won. And one analyst who was looking at some of the polling numbers said it was entirely possible that Bernie Sanders could win the first alignment votes, the first round of voting, on which is just the kind of raw numbers of how many people support you as their first choice. Then on the second ballot, where some candidates are on low voting have been eliminated, that Elizabeth Warren could win on the second round. And yet, because of the distribution of those votes, like Bernie Sanders, for example, doing incredibly well in college towns and not so well in sort of middle-class suburbs, that Pete Buttigieg could end up winning the most delegates overall. I mean, this system is a complete catastrophe.
Nightmare.
Everything has gone wrong with it. And I have to say, the app that was created to do all this tallying of the votes was produced by a new startup company called Shadow Inc. Which, I mean, if you're looking for maximum transparency in your elections, why contract it out to a company that sounds like something out of a Bond movie?
Out of a Bond movie, yeah. Well, I mean, that's why my initial question was, are we going to hear stories of conspiracy and corruption out of this? And it may be the fact that the app wasn't up to standard. There could have been overusage of the network system and all the rest of it. But once you rule those kind of things out, you then have got to say, right, okay, where is this company, Shadow Inc., getting their money from? Who have they got in there that's apparently developing and testing the software before they go live?
Interestingly, the company has provided other services to Joe Biden and Pete Buttigieg. So people are already, the conspiracy theories are already running wild online. And that's one of the problems. Like, everybody is now saying, oh, it's the Russians, it's so-and-so. And it's one of these problems if you don't have decent election infrastructure, which the US on multiple levels has really, really bad. We've been talking about this ever since the hanging Chads from Al Gore versus George Bush in 2000. They're just, the way they run their elections is a mess.
And we think that we've got it wrong because we're waiting sometimes to 9 o'clock the following morning to get the results from Orkney and Shetland and all the rest of it.
Well, Donald Trump got a good kick out of it. The impeachment trial of US President Donald Trump is due to draw to a close very shortly, before the Senate is scheduled to vote tomorrow on whether he should be removed from office. The trial, which began on January 16th, which has featured no witnesses and no examination of evidence, after Senate Majority Leader, the Republican Mitch McConnell, admitted to breaching his oath of office to act impartially and coordinating trial structure and strategy with Trump's White House. With nearly all of Trump's fellow Republicans defending him, Democrats are expected to fail in their attempt to convict Trump on charges of abuse of power and obstruction of Congress in his dealings with Ukraine. Democrats have always known that removing Trump from office would be all but impossible, but argued that his leaning heavily on Ukraine to implicate Joe Biden in a corruption scandal was so far beyond the pale that impeachment became the only choice. Their hope has been that by exposing Trump's behaviour and the refusal of Republican senators to even allow a fair trial, they would generate enough disgust from swing voters to unseat Trump, keep their majority in the House of Representatives, and even seize the Senate from Republican control in elections this November. Trump has always claimed innocence on all charges, but the evidence compiled by the House of Representatives presents a very strong case. New evidence has also emerged during the trial, including a book written by former National Security Advisor John Bolton, and multiple examples of lawyers and others on Trump's team lying to the Senate and to the public. Meanwhile, Trump will give his third State of the Union speech tonight, where he is expected to focus on what he calls the Great American Comeback, with record high employment and GDP statistics. He's also expected to attack the Democrats for the socialist policies adopted by many within the party. So, I mean, this trial, it's been a farce from start to finish. I think we can pretty confidently say Trump's going to be acquitted on all charges. He's almost certainly going to say that proves that he didn't do anything wrong, even when literally everything about this trial says he very, very much did.
Oh, yeah. And as I alluded to last night, this will just go down as a blot in his copybook, and it'll be nothing else. It begs the further question that what is half of America thinking about when the evidence is clearly stacked against him, and yet he can still get away relatively, I hate to use the word, scot-free. So I mean, we think that we've got it bad in this unequal union of nations that we're in, and you think some of the poor people in America just cannot see the wood for the trees because honestly, I could see Trump getting another.
It's far from impossible. I mean, I think honestly the biggest thing, and we don't have time to go into this, but for me the biggest issue in American politics is their media. Fox News, MSNBC, even to CNN, PBS to some extent, are all very bad at telling you the news straight down the line.
But then that leads back to our earlier story when we were talking about the right-wing media in the UK, and now that they're getting excluded, they're starting to take umbrage about it. Excluding
journalists from press, disliked journalists from press conference is one of Trump's trademarks as well. We do have to move on. I mean, again, we could talk about American politics all night, but we will have to move on. And back in Scotland, Scottish Greens Justice spokesperson John Finney, MSP, today secured support for an amendment to the Scottish Biometrics Commissioner Bill, which adds greater protections for data held by the police. The bill creates the position of Biometrics Commissioner, who will provide independent oversight of police use of biometric data, including by creating a code of practice. The original drafting of the bill would have required police simply to have regard to the code of practice, but following Mr. Finney's amendment, they will now be required to comply with the code. Biometrics is a broad category which includes data such as fingerprints and DNA, which have been used by police for years, as well as more emerging technology such as facial recognition software. And I think, Chris, you'll be fairly glad to hear this, that the police will now have to follow rules rather than just pay attention to them.
What you're alluding to there, Kenneth. No, I personally think that any extra support that the police can get from the Scottish Government, and insofar as procedures and guidelines, as to be welcome. I mean, back in the day when I was a bit of a lad, I didn't have an awful lot of regard for the police, but now maturing more and more, I think they've pretty much had quite a raw deal over the past number of years, and I actually do think that the Scottish Police Service is head and shoulders above the Met. So I can't. Anytime that I see a good story about Scottish police, then I like to, sort of like welcome it and hope that they can use it going forward to, keep us safe, because they do a really good job on the whole.
Well, I'm sure they'll be keeping you safe on the barricades, Chris. We do just have one more story tonight. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has met the challenge of listening to more than 1,000 care experienced young people as they discuss the changes they want to see to the system just days ahead of the publication of the forthcoming independent care review. The First Minister pledged in 2016 to meet at least 1,000 care experienced young people while the review did its work. During that time, she also announced the removal of the upper age limit for the £8,100 per year bursary which care experienced students are entitled to, the introduction of the Children's Bill, which will ensure siblings and wider family relationships are protected where it is safe to do so. Children's rights will be embedded in law so that anyone in care or leaving care can access the support they are entitled to without having to fight for it. And the introduction of the £33 million Care Experienced Children and Young People's Fund to improve educational outcomes for young people with care experience, funding projects ranging from mentoring and counselling to practical skills like driving lessons. And this, Chris, for me, is one of the most important duties of a country. People who are in the care of the state have to be given every possible opportunity to succeed later in life. So have you got any thoughts on this?
Well, I actually had an interesting conversation. As you know, my daughter has got disability issues, and I was able to take her out to M&D's, and I was only driving her, but she had a care worker with her, so that she was under supervision for the whole of the day. And I was explaining to the care worker that back in my day, if you were a disadvantaged disabled person, you were pretty much treated, really badly. So what the Scottish Government are doing to enhance the lives of people in the care sector, it's absolutely got to be welcomed,
Yeah, I mean, people in care, and especially young people in care, have all sorts of challenges. I mean, having come from presumably difficult lives before they went into care, and then to come out the other end previously with very little support, it is a great step forward that I think we can all welcome. That is all we've got time for tonight, though. So I'd like to thank Chris for joining us. It's always a pleasure. And I'd like to thank you for joining us as well. It's the most important thing about what we do here is that we are reaching an audience. So we always want to thank you for being with us. If you're able to support us, that makes all the difference in the world. It isn't an easy business putting on a news show every single night, and getting out and doing all the wonderful things we've been doing at the weekend, getting up to Aberdeen, getting to the Parliament, getting to the other events that we cover as much as we can. So if you are able to support us, please do go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register, sign up as a supporter, contribute your £5 a month. It's less than a licence fee for the BBC, especially given that they're bumping that up as well.
£3.
Exactly. You get barely the cost of a Starbucks for once a month. That's the difference, and it makes it possible for us to keep going here, to keep producing more and better programmes for you. If you're not able to support us financially, again, don't feel bad about it. It's not your fault. But if you want to follow us on social media at Broadcast Scot, like our Facebook page, and share the programme around, that's how we can reach more people. Maybe some of them can put in a fiver on your behalf. So thank you to everybody who's joined us. Thank you again to Chris. Thank you to the production team here at Broadcasting Scotland. We will be back tomorrow at 7 with Scotland at 7. And until then, have a great night.
How do you mean no more commission?
Well, no one in Scotland can commission an idea. You know, if I went to BBC Scotland and I said, oh, I've got this great idea for a sitcom, I've got this brilliant idea for a drama, you know, there isn't one person in Scotland that can okay it unless it goes through London.
Good morning and welcome to another edition of Full Scottish. What's happening today?
Hello and welcome to the Full Scottish here on Broadcasting Scotland.
Scotland is going to be an independent country.
That need, that desire for independence is ever stronger than perhaps it was in 2014. So there's an obligation that we've got to give leadership to that campaign. That's what Nicola Sturgeon, as our First Minister, has been doing.
My feeling about Boris Johnson is he can't be trusted on anything.
That is now and forever will be known as the rape clause.
I'm old enough to remember going into Europe in '73, and I remember how much of a razor's edge that was a balanced stone. And I think we made it by 53%, if I remember correctly, for going in. And ever since that time, England particularly has been pretty much schizophrenic, down the middle about whether it felt British or whether it felt European. And that schism, that crack has remained throughout English society ever since.
Scotland means business. Scotland's voice won't be stilled, it won't be silenced, it has to be heard.
The work that's been done by Broadcasting Scotland in giving community activists, yes activists, Scottish activists a platform other than the traditional media outlets.